and we kind of talked about Black Hat a little bit earlier, but you've spoken at Black Hat a number of times in some other conventions over the course of your career. What are some of the talks that stick out in your mind as favorite? They could be your talks, or they could be other people's talks that you've seen.
For my own, I think the last one I gave at DEF CON about abusing ACLs in Active Directory, and the one I gave previous to that about Microsoft's advanced threat analytics. These two were my favorite ones. And that's about me. From someone else's talks, I mean, usually you will find me in the lobby con, right? Not actually attending talks, but meeting up with people. But one that stands out is there was a talk about Harun Mir when they released Canary tokens, the free version. I think it was in Black Hat 2015 or 16. So that was a fantastic. And Harun is a very good speaker. So I remember almost every word he said in that talk. That was a fantastic talk. Another one that stands out is by Vivek Ramchandran. So he demonstrated some tools in the Wi-Fi, in the packet hacking village or the Wi-Fi village in DEF CON a few years back. That was also a fantastic talk. So these two stand out for me personally.
That's awesome. Have you seen any talks, or even one of those two, that may have changed the way that you looked at the cybersecurity industry?
I think yes, especially the one by Harun, because we were working on something similar at the time. So one very interesting thing that stood out was about false positives. So Harun was like, okay, we tend to discard detection mechanisms very quickly if it is throwing false positives. So his argument was, even if there is a detection mechanism that shares, let's say, 100 false positives, but even there is a one correct detection, then it is worth it. And then because he's a very good speaker, he convinced me to that. And I would say to some extent, deploy deception was something that was sown into my mind at the time that, okay, we can do something like that. So yeah, that stood out, and that changed how I looked at detection mechanisms.
That's awesome. It's always good to walk out of a talk and be like, mind blown, right?
Right.
That's good. So, there's a kind of three large conventions that kind of go on in the US, right? There's Black Hat, DEF CON, and then there's B-Sides, which happens a little bit everywhere, right? What are some other conventions that you really like to go to, or that you just kind of like to give a shout out to? Not only just in America, or maybe where you're at in India, right? You're in India right now? Okay, sick. And then, or even Europe, anywhere else that you've kind of just noticed this is an awesome convention.
Now, one I've been regular to is BrewCon. That's in Belgium, Ghent, Belgium. The city is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. The city, the location, that's fantastic. And it is a very friendly convention. One thing that I don't like about the three big ones is, one, when I leave India, I don't want to go to another hot place. So that's one. So Vegas is not something that I would go if I do not have friends or business there. Or at least not in end of July or in August beginning. Absolutely not. That is something that I'm trying to escape actively at that time. So don't want to go from 43 degrees Celsius to 45. No, that's not me. So that's one. But BrewCon I really like is it's a lot more cozy, and because there is, I think they limit attendance to 300. So it's a lot more. You can, for example, if you see, let's say Didier Stevens. If you see him at Black Hat, you can't go and talk to him probably because he would be surrounded by so many people. But at BrewCon, he's walking around everywhere like every other human. So that is, not only specifically for that, not only BrewCon, most of the European conferences and some in US as well, those are smaller. So they feel more cozy, and it's easier to approach even the big names.
One of the things that I learned in school, so I transferred schools from a pretty big school to a pretty small school. And I went from, there was one class that there were 300, not 300, that's insane. 120 something people, right? And then from there on at my new school, every class had 15 people. And I feel like just learning that bigger isn't always better, and like that more intimate setting can be fantastic. So that's a really cool, you know, concept on just capping it at 300 people for that convention. As like they're like the big cybersecurity tech companies, like there's FireEye, CrowdStrike, Cyber Reason, like some of these like just large companies whose like their main job is cybersecurity. Um, and then of course you got like the major cloud providers like Amazon, Microsoft, some of the other ones that are out there. How do you see that integration going where clients can kind of move to the cloud and then still leverage the resources of one of the major cybersecurity companies?
I mean, at least for Microsoft, I can tell you because I work pretty much on Azure. Microsoft, although it supports, let's say, other vendors, but it is actively trying to to provide an alternative of everything of using their own products. So all the third-party vendors are there to stay because they have their own specializations, their own benefits. But at least in case of Azure, I can share that with you that there is a lot of push from Microsoft to keep using Microsoft's own products. There is pretty much everything that you would expect, let's say, at least in terms of security, that Microsoft provides, right from backup to EDRs to XDRs, the insert latest marketing buzzword, everything is right there. So at least for them, they are not going to leave space for anyone else, it looks like.
I feel like that could be a good and a bad thing, one of the things is just like general integration. A lot of companies have established relationships with like a third party that kind of handles the security side of it, or the security side of their business, and so that might be kind of like a roadblock for moving to the cloud. Do you think that this? I mean, I know that you said that Microsoft is actively pushing for clients to use their security products. Do you think that this, I guess, challenge for potential new clients moving to the cloud could be a reason for Microsoft to consider, I guess, more integration with third parties? I know that you said that they have, some good integrations there, but I guess, do you think that they could potentially be more willing to accept third-party work on the cloud, or do you think that will make them lean further into developing their own security services?
I mean, I would answer this with it. I'm always pro-choice. So the more vendors and options that we have, let's say even in Azure, I mean, no, I'm not a legal expert, but the way they are going, probably that's antitrust waiting for them, right? There's no apparent or direct pushback, but you could see that if you, let's say, even go in Azure Market Center and search for something that Microsoft offers. So the competition is definitely not going to be able to keep up. We cannot compete with Microsoft on their own platform. So I would say they are still going to keep developing security services, everything right from AV to EDR or anti-ransomware or whatever the latest marketing buzzword, including blockchain, for example. So they are going to keep doing that, but I would wish that more and more small and independent vendors keep coming with their awesome stuff. I mean, FireEye and others are already too big. What I would like is to see niche vendors offering very targeted products that only, let's say, a certain part of the whole global economy can use, or a very small part. So that is something that improves security, actually.
And I guess it kind of tied into a previous thread that we've talked about is, developing a product to really tackle phishing. Have you seen anything out there maybe that is kind of doing a good job with that, or is that kind of just one of those areas that, I know you mentioned earlier that technology has failed on this issue so far. I guess that, do you think that that's one area that we could have more specialized vendors that could provide that answer?
I recall looking at one, of course, the name, I cannot recall the name right now, but most of the stuff that I've been using, those are actually, because of my line of work, those have been phishing simulation tools, actually. So that is something that I've seen more, that actually simulates the whole campaign for you, right from customization to the email language that the target organization uses based on their geography. So some of these simulation tools are really next level. So for example, if they want to target someone sitting in Bangalore, India, so they would, let's say, for example, a very good example that even I personally use is, if I'm going to fish someone in UK or in Australia, I would write in my signature, cheers, Nikhil. That's how they use. If I'm writing it to someone in India, I would either write with regards or warm regards, because that's what the tech culture uses in India. So I've seen some phishing simulation tools that even take care of that. So unfortunately, that is the line of products I've seen more. But I remember at least one, of course, I could not recall the name, that is trying to solve this problem. And I saw that on my Twitter, actually. Someone was all praised for that. So yeah, probably at least someone is trying to do that.
I've noticed this kind of trend as well on YouTube, just as like a content creator, where there's a lot of channels that are posting like the more offensive security side of the house, like the red teaming. There's not a lot of stuff on the blue team that can kind of be a bit of an issue, right? There a lot, I guess, and maybe you can correct me if this is incorrect, but I feel like more people are blue team than red team per capita in cybersecurity, right? And so, do you think that that's like a kind of like one of those like on the to do list? That's just a list on the to do list is, improve the amount of vendors for blue team needs, in cybersecurity.
I would say the reason that I see that is the blue team is a lot more uh, industrialized. A lot more enterprise tools are available for the blue teams. In fact, for example, you cannot compare anything to Splunk. For example, there is absolutely nothing for the red teams that even remotely compares to the scale and the stability of, let's say, even Splunk. So that's one of the main reasons. The blue team has already moved to enterprise grade tools like what, a decade back? Right? You would really, for example, when I started in my career, we used to use OZAC framework, for example, to monitor stuff. And I mean, organizations still use that. But you go to any medium-sized organization and they would be using some enterprise grade tools, not rarely, if not, then I mean, rarely an open source tool got downloaded from GitHub. Whereas for the red team part, it is still, I mean, the closest we have to any enterprise grade tool is what, Cobalt Strike, which is good to have, but not really an enterprise grade tool. So that's the reason red teaming is still a lot open source and hack based. So that's and of course it is, you will not see in what you saw in Swordfish was, let's say, the lead character breaking into an organization, not someone putting up a firewall and blocking the attack, right? So red teaming is considered to be sexy. Blue teaming is the board tick tick tock tock stuff. So that's also the reason. But industry-wise, if you talk about the industry as an InfoSec industry, I believe that because blue team have a lot better, at least a lot better sold tools at their hand. So that's the reason that we do not see a lot of content generation for them.
That makes a lot of sense. Like it's more catered to, at least at an industrial level. So I guess you mean to say that red teaming requires more creativity? Do you mean?
I would say not really, not really. I would not say that blue teaming is easy. What I wanted to say that red teaming is still a lot of hack. Pull stuff together from 10 GitHub accounts and then shove them in your lab, check if that works, and then use in an assessment, let's say. For the blue teams, it's a lot of ready-to-use product. It may not be as effective as advertised, but you would have, okay, here's your, let's take an example of detection once again. Here's your centralized dashboard. Deploy agents, deployed on all the machines, and now you would have logs. Now, how the efficacy is always questionable, but using it is now scaled. That's not true. I mean, try using, let's say, I mean, I love that tool, although I don't use that much, but let's say try using Cobalt Strike against 10,000 machines at a time. right? It will simply won't work. So that is what I'm talking. It's the red team part is still based a lot on what others share. That's not as much true for the blue team.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. Do you think that that in the future, since blue team has, I guess, kind of like, I don't want to say the set vendors, but like you mentioned Splunk, for instance, like that's kind of like you hear Splunk on the blue team and you know exactly what they do, and you'd be kind of hard pressed to find a second sim that is, as competitive as Splunk is. Maybe go down 2, 3, and then you have 2 or 3 listed, but then 4, 5, 6, you'd have a harder time, right? Like, do you think that vendors will start to create red team products? Maybe like you mentioned automated phishing, right? And I know that vulnerability scanning is already, kind of, there are solutions out there at an enterprise level. But what about more like intensive, penetration testing assets or enterprise products? Do you think that vendors will start to move into that area, or is that kind of one of those, gray areas? Like, are we producing, products for a company that they can use to better security, or are we really just producing cyber weapons that could be used in a wrong way?
Now, there is definitely a move. There is definitely a move. I mean, I've seen private products that, those that my students have shown me that they use internally. And, not only the larger organizations, even smaller ones, even simple changes to, let's say, when the BC Empire tool came out, then after that, I came to know about, one of my students showed me that another fork of it that they are using privately that uses a lot of interesting things, additional things over BC Empire. So yes, there would be commercial. There are already, for example, Skype, and then one tool by the Outflank guys, of course, Cobalt Strike. And I was just looking at today evening, I was looking at evening my time, I was looking at this tweets from Dominic from MDSec. They have a tool called Nighthawk. So yeah, there is definitely a move. And you're right, those are, I think, as Cobalt Strike is, those tools are going to be controlled by export restrictions. So at least the NATO countries would get them, at least that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That'll be interesting to kind of see where that goes in the future. That like maybe, in 12 years, we'll be able to meet again and we can kind of look back and be like, wow, that got interesting. Things got a little hairy there for a little bit, maybe. I know that it's probably getting pretty late there, so I kind of want to, wind things down a little bit. But I see on, your Twitter profile that you're, a military and history nerd. I myself am a military and history nerd, so I see that and I'm like, yes. What would you say is an era of history that is under talked about, I guess?
Okay. So I would say everything other than the popular history. So there is history, as you would know. There is history, and then there is popular history. So everything that is, so for example, because I'm an Indian, so when Alexander invaded India in 326 BC, so it is, a lot is talked about how the battle Alexander had with one of the Indian kings. But there are a lot more, for example, and then some of these are simply lores. For example, that there was a malaria outbreak in the Macedonian army that led to the retreat. So things like that, not only that. So there is something called popular history, and then there is actual history. For example, what was the economic reasons behind, let's say, Alexander's retreat, right? Or, for example, Polynesian history. So only the authors would know that, right? So Polynesians actually crossed the Pacific, like what, 1,000 years before, let's say, Christopher Columbus? But that's not really talked about a lot. So these are some of the things that, I would not say a particular era, but not popular history, something that I rarely see talk about.
I like that. I like kind of like breaking. I don't think I've heard that before. Breaking into popular history and then like I guess not popular history, right? That's interesting. I feel like for myself, like just as an American, of course, like I feel like the Korean War is just one of those things that, why don't we talk about that? Like that's kind of crazy, right? and it still like reverberates today. But that's awesome. So we'll kind of wrap up, this recording here. But where are some places that people can find and follow you? Any social media, blogs, and where they can find your research.
My Twitter would be the best place because I like sharing stuff. So whenever I do anything new, so I'm Nikhil _MITT on Twitter. So yeah, that's the place.
Thank you, Nikhil, for coming onto this channel. I really appreciate it again. I had an absolutely amazing time. If you enjoyed this interview, make sure that you like this video. And if you got any thoughts about this interview, make sure you comment down below. And as always, be sure to subscribe. I really appreciate it. So with that, I'll see you next time.